Welcome, everyone. We'll take a moment just to let us all assemble. See some familiar names here. And I tell you what, as an opportunity for us all to introduce ourselves to each other, why don't we go ahead and let's use the chat function. I will do so myself. And we'll use the chat function to let us know where you're joining us from. All right, so hopefully you are able to use that chat function down at the center bottom of your screen. Say hello, and let's find out where everyone's joining us from. Terrific. Reston, Virginia.
Just west of DC.
Right. Cross Plains, Wisconsin. All right. Well, so I'm going to test my knowledge of two-letter state abbreviations. Okay. Got Portland, Oregon, Alexandria, Virginia, excuse me, Austin, Texas, Cleveland, Ohio. All right. Wow, what a great range of geographies. Not unlike our panel today. Dallas, Texas, Monterey Park, Southern California. Is that a separate state, Ron? Not to confuse anyone. Dallas Metro and Richmond. All right. Oh, and others are still joining. Okay. I'll just note once again, welcome to our session today. I will ask folks to introduce themselves via the chat. So if you can pull up that chat window to go ahead and let folks know where you're joining us from. That'll give us a sense of the geography. And for those who are joining us in progress, I'll just share that we've got folks from Virginia, Wisconsin, Oregon, North Carolina, Arkansas. I missed Arkansas earlier. Terrific. Virginia, Oregon again, Texas, Ohio, Tennessee, Southern California, Texas, Virginia. Outstanding. Really great to see familiar names, great towns, and really looking forward to our conversation. Why don't we just give it another minute as folks are getting oriented. And let's see, take a moment here. All right, well, I think we're fairly stable in terms of folks joining us. Once again, really want to welcome and thank everyone for joining us here today. This is what we're calling part of ICMA's Courageous Conversations, and a wonderful opportunity for us to get together on topics of mutual interest and a variety of perspectives that we'll share. Today, we've got a terrific panel that will be focusing on experiences of up-and-coming leaders in local government management. And really looking forward to both the discussions we'll have today, as well as, we've got, as you'd expect, some questions that we've teed up, but also like to invite questions from our attendees. So please feel free to use the chat for questions or comments actually you'd like to share as we go through our discussion today. So let's see, well, I think we're just about ready to get started. So I'll go ahead and kick us off. Once again, welcome. My name's Ed Shikada. I'm city manager in Palo Alto, California. I'm also a member of the ICMA Executive Board. I really would like to welcome you all to our Courageous Conversation today, one of a series of conversations sponsored by ICMA on race, equity, and inclusion issues. And today, in particular, timely as a part of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Let me kick us off before we get into the discussion with a bit of context. All of the panelists we have today are involved in an organization called I-NAPA, the International Network of Asian Public Administrators. And I would like to just take a moment to reflect on how ICMA and I-NAPA are connected. The genesis for this organization, I'd still call a startup or nascent organization, I-NAPA, began at the 2015 ICMA annual conference in Seattle. Just to give you a sense of a picture, at least from my perspective, as I was one of the people there, we're in the general session, one of the general sessions at the annual conference in Seattle at the conference center in the exhibit hall. And as you'd imagine, a huge exhibit hall, probably 2,000, maybe more people in the room. We were listening to a keynote address by one of the speakers, a speaker by the name of Vernon Elena, who was speaking on diversity and inclusion. As a part of her discussion of diversity and inclusion, she asked members of the audience to stand based on the way they identify themselves, whether it be men, women, Black, Hispanic, and a variety of categories. When she got to Asian, in a room of about 2,000 people, I would guess there were about 10 people that stood up in the room. And again, you can do the math, but that's not a very big showing. That was really the impetus for what got I-NAPA and the most recent conversations around the need to develop an organization that would provide support and mentoring and professional development for members of the Asian American community, Pacific Islander community. So with that, ICMA has since supported the development of this organization through a supporting survey of members, allowing us space at the annual conference to have meetings, through hosting the I-NAPA website, through participation in the ICMA Coach Connect in various iterations it's taken over the years, as well as now establishing I-NAPA as an affiliate organization with ICMA. And so today's session is just the latest example of how ICMA members' investment in ICMA is advancing progress in our local government management profession. So if you find today's session valuable, find the nearest ICMA member and thank them for their investment. Okay, so with that, let's get started with our panel. So first off, let me just note the geography of the panelists because I'm really proud of the group that we've got here today. So I'll just identify them by their geography, name, and their current role in local government. Then we'll come back and hear a little bit about what brought them here to this conversation, to ICMA and to I-NAPA. We have from the city of Dallas, Texas, Genesis Gavino, Chief Resilience Officer. Oops, let's see, I just lost my screen. Let's bring that back. Sorry about that. We have from the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County in Tennessee, Tadayoshi Kawawa, Finance Officer with the General Sessions Court. We have from the city of Fife, Washington, Hyun Kim, City Manager. From the city of Decatur, Georgia, Ashwaryakumar, City Manager's Office Operations Analyst. From the city of Hillsboro, Oregon, Neha Subramanyam. I knew I was going to mess that up. Sorry, Neha. Policy Analyst. And we have from the town of Barre, Vermont, Elaine Wang, Assistant Town Manager. So let's start off with Genesis. Please share a bit about yourself, your background, and what led you to ICMA and I-NAPA.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon as well. Thank you, Ed. So like Ed said, my name is Genesis Gavino, and I currently serve as Resilience Officer for the City of Dallas. And prior to that, I was Assistant to the City Manager and Chief of Staff in Dallas. What led me to ICMA and I-NAPA? So I am a product of the Local Government Management Fellow Program through ICMA. I spent 2 years in the city of Tacoma, shadowing the city manager and various directors, just learning the ins and outs of local government. And so a big shout out to the Fellows Program. Can't recommend it enough. And you'll see that several of us are products of that program. And then also, as Ed mentioned, the 2015 conference, I was that annoying student or, recent graduate who was pestering ICMA about the lack of representation and essentially identifying people it was profiling essentially who I saw who were Asian and asking, hey, is this something that we can do? So that's what really brought me to ICMA, and also as a co-founding member of I-NAPA, really as Ed said, want to provide resources, leadership development, and mentorship opportunities for the future and also for current public administrators. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Genesis. Next up, Tadayoshi or Yoshi Kawawa. Tell us what brought you here today.
Hi. As Ed said, my name is Tadayoshi, or Yoshi for short, and I'm the finance officer for General Sessions Court in Metro Nashville and Davidson County, Tennessee. So I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. My undergrad was in political science, where one of my electives I took was Intro to Public Administration. And one of the case studies that we had actually took place in Wichita, my hometown where I was living. And it was about, they just discovered some groundwater contamination downtown in the 90s that was threatening to derail all the investment and development that was in the works. But the city manager worked with federal, state, and local groups to get everyone on board a cleanup plan that kept it from becoming a Superfund site and allowed the banks to continue lending. And today they have a thriving downtown. I think typically case studies and textbooks are all about things that went wrong and everything people could have done to prevent all the disasters that happened. But I think this might have been the only case study in our textbook that actually had a happy ending. But this showed me how you can be a force for good and the kind of impact you can have in the public sector and in local governments. So after my undergrad, I went into the MPA program where I learned about ICMA and the work that they do. And while getting my MPA, I worked as a graduate research assistant, which allowed me the opportunity to attend the ICMA conference in Seattle in 2015. And that was just an incredible experience, being able to attend all the different sessions about the different facets of local government, meeting people from across the country in the profession. And after graduation, as an ICMA local government management fellow, and later through other local government roles, I was able to continue attending ICMA conferences. And I kept seeing in the conference schedule this network of Asian public administrators meeting. And I was wondering, what is this group? How do I learn more about them or get involved? Can I just crash their meeting? Or it wasn't until I met a manager from Colorado, Charles Osaki, at one of the receptions, and I saw he had an I-NAPA ribbon on his conference badge. And so I asked him, please tell me about this group. And I'm so grateful to him for telling me about I-NAPA and encouraging me to reach out and get involved. And now, whether it's through their monthly virtual boba breaks or webinars like this, it's just been a really great experience to get to meet and compare notes with such a diverse group of people in different regions and career stages.
Wow, what a great plug for those ribbons we got. Great idea, Genesis. All right, next up, we've got Hyun Kim. Hyun, please share with us your story.
Good morning, Ed. Hyun Kim. I've been in local government for a little over 10 years officially in a management track, I guess. I started off in high school. My first job in high school was with the city of Henderson in Nevada. All throughout high school, I've always wanted to work in local government. I did my undergraduate in public administration at UNLV. And in terms of finding ICMA, it's always been ingrained in me that I wanted to be a part of ICMA. It wasn't actually until I think about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, Yoshi's story is actually very similar to mine in the sense that I saw a group of Asian professionals sitting at a lunchroom and they were having a conversation, or what I assumed was a conversation. I sat down and asked, can I join you all? Did not realize that I-NAPA was having a formative board meeting. And but the board members were kind enough to let me sit there. Goes back to what Ed mentioned earlier on. The group is incredibly nimble, and in the formative stages of supporting other Asian Americans as well as other career administrators that are supporting predominantly Asian communities, I-NAPA is the place to be. So that's how I found both groups. So thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks, Hyun. All right, next up, Aishwarya. Ash, please tell us what brought you here.
Thanks, Ed. You are doing such a wonderful job pronouncing my name. I'm very impressed. I think at all the official meetings, I'm going to use my full name. So as Ed mentioned, I'm Ashwaryakumar. I have been in the US since 2016. I came here for my graduate degree. I am originally from India. I studied urban planning from CEPT University. And I mentioned CEPT University because they've started a new ICMA student chapter recently. So I think it might be the first student chapter in South Asia. So it's just amazing to have all these connections. And I attended my first ICMA conference in San Antonio in 2017 when I was still a grad student. Found about I-NAPA, sat in on a meeting like Hyun said. So it has been so similar in so many ways. And that is when I found out about the local government management fellowship as well. So I applied for the fellowship and I started my fellowship in 2018 with the city of Decatur in Georgia from 2018 to 2020. And currently I work as the operations analyst for the city of Decatur. So it has been an interesting journey, but ICMA has been a huge part of it. So I'm so grateful, so thankful for all the resources that ICMA makes available for all of us. And I-NAPA, I think we all know each other, everyone on this panel, we know each other as colleagues, as friends because of I-NAPA, because of the boba breaks Yoshi mentioned. So just so grateful and thankful and privileged to be a part of this awesome panel here.
Thanks, Ash. Okay, so from Georgia to Oregon, Neha Subramanyam. Neha, please tell us what brought you here.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be with all of you. And I just wanted to say thank you to Ed and the other folks that have been organizing this panel. I'm so excited to just have this conversation. So my name is Neha Subramanyam. I use pronouns she and her. I am a policy analyst in the city manager's office at the city of Hillsboro in Oregon. We are about 15 miles west of Portland. I first got involved in ICMA very recently. I want to say it was only 2 years ago. My first ICMA conference that I attended was in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's when I saw on the conference agenda, there is a meeting with Asian administrators. And I was like, what is this? And I love the theme so far of us profiling each other out, because I absolutely did that. And I think I saw Genesis in one of the meetings and I was like, hey, what are you doing? What's this all about? And I'm so glad I had that conversation, because I-NAPA has just been this tremendous resource to be a part of. I really looked forward to the monthly boba breaks that we have. It's this beautiful space that we've created to exchange stories and be personal and be open and transparent about who we are. And I really value the resource that I-NAPA has been.
Thanks so much, Neha. All right, then from Oregon back to the East Coast, Vermont, Elaine Wang from Barre. I mess up the name of your town constantly, so please correct me and run with it.
You got it right this time, so I appreciate that. I am delighted to be here too. Thank you everybody for being here. I respond to she and they pronouns. So since I was in elementary school, I wanted to work in environmental protection in the nonprofit sector. So I think, unlike the rest of the panelists, I've been a mid-career change here into the local government area. So I did do that nonprofit environmental protection work for most of my life. I also supported in that work, I also supported local governments to identify climate protective actions and to implement them. Then about 7 years ago, I became disillusioned with grant funded work because it too often meant that we had to pull out of a place before we would really finish the job. As you can see, we still have climate change. I had, though, become interested in working for local government because that's where the rubber meets the road, as you all know, where ideas become reality and where so many decisions do affect the environment also. I was nervous, though, about leaving a profession I'd been working towards almost my whole life. I was in my mid-30s at the time. So in a way, the nonprofit I worked for did me a favor by laying me off. I was lucky that the manager of the town I live in, who's well regarded, agreed to let me shadow him. And not long after, his assistant town manager left to take manager job, and my manager asked me whether I wanted to work part-time. Of course, I was delighted. Once that nonprofit I had worked for laid me off completely, the town manager brought me on full-time as assistant. So this probably doesn't apply to this group, but if you have anyone you are mentoring or talking to that needs like a mid-career change story, I'm happy to chat with them, or you can give them my example. So soon after that, in 2016, I paid my own way to ICMA Kansas City, where I was delighted to hear that there would be a presentation on a survey of Asians in local government that was presented by Ed and Genesis. And there were some other folks that were presenting that are no longer involved, or are less involved. And also I met Charles Exaki, just like Tadayoshi did, just out in the open, spotted him in the wild, ran up to him. Ed also has a Charles story. I see he joined. Thank you, Charles, for helping us feel like we belong. So I wanted to help out after that conference. So I joined the leadership committee for I-NAPA, joined those monthly calls, and have been on the I-NAPA board ever since.
Terrific. Wow. Such a wide range of stories, although I do note the Charles Osaki connection. So Charles is here on the call, and we see you, Charles, and appreciate your leadership that has been sort of the flame that us moths are gravitated to, and have allowed us to connect and build from there. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. We've got a series of questions, and we called this Courageous Conversation. So let's go ahead and not disappoint. We'll lead off and tackle issues head on. Let's talk about, let's see. Well, we'll go straight on to the ongoing concerns about anti-Asian violence that are occurring throughout our country. Let's see. Let's ask the panel to describe how this has affected your work as well as you personally. And where have local government responses fallen short? Elaine, let's lead off with you.
Thanks, Ed. So Vermont is the second whitest state in the country. Barrytown, where I live and work, is 96.1% white. According to the 2019 American Community Survey population estimate, just 24 individuals who live here are Asian. So there's lack of awareness. And not only that, my town is especially socially insulated. Vermont might be seen as progressive nationally, and there are other vast majority white towns in Vermont that have created equity committees and flown the Black Lives Matter flag and been trying to feel their way through it. But here in Barrytown, it's been crickets. So I've found a low level of racial and other equity and inclusion literacy among our leadership. Although many do support equity when push comes to shove, or if you really have a conversation with them. They're more ignorant than they are consciously biased around. That's the type of environment that I'm dealing with. But I have to say, as one type of challenge, this ignorance is bad enough because it's like pushing against a blank wall. This is prior to the anti-Asian violence of this past year, but it's hard to deliver trainings on any of these topics, have discussions, propose changes to practice, because it's hard to get through that wall of ignorance. There's like no opening there. It's made doubly hard because I am the only person of color among anyone who serves the town, whether it's staff or bodies that serve the town. And it's rare that anyone else brings up these issues. So when I do, I feel like I have a lighthouse on my head. I think a lot of you probably understand what I mean by that. So what's really affected me about the anti-Asian violence is that not one person I work with and not one white acquaintance in my community has said anything to me after the Atlanta murders, which were the ones that affected me personally the most. I was a wreck after that. So, some of those folks, they don't follow the news. Some of them saw that news and didn't realize it might affect me. Some of them realized it would, but didn't know what to say. So however unintended this lack of empathy, the fact is I experienced this universal silence as an erasure of me, as the Asian part of my identity, which at that moment was very important to me. So if I were to summarize the Asian American experience in one sentence, and obviously there's different perspectives on this from folks on this call, I'd say that white America only notices Asians when it's convenient, or when they want a scapegoat and we're invisible the rest of the time. So for those of you who are on this call who are white and did not check in on your Asian colleagues and acquaintances this year, just realize that a lot of us felt this way, that I do. Silence might feel safe for you, but it might feel like erasure to us. I'd encourage you to be brave enough to speak up, try to take action, and accept that you might get it wrong, but to keep trying. And for those of us, many of us on this call probably identify as Asian American, who are in possibly vast majority white places. I want to tell you that it is possible to find community even in those places. It took me 15 years in Vermont, but in the last 2 years, I have found a Vermont white Asian community and a county level woman of color community, and then of course I-NAPA on a national level, which has been extremely important to my feeling of well-being. So if I can find cultural community in Vermont, I'm thinking that you can too if you haven't already. Thanks.
Thank you, Elaine. Okay, Genesis, how about sharing a perspective?
Thank you, Ed. So as I said earlier, my role as I am resilience officer for the city of Dallas, and here in Dallas, we lead our efforts with equity lens, right? And so I think being an Asian American woman has forced, my perspective has brought our issues to the forefront in a lot of the work that we do, even though the Asian population in Dallas is, I think, less than 5%, barely even 4%, I think, at that. Probably a little bit more than the 24 where Elaine is, but still very small, and we're often left as an afterthought, right? When you're considering communities of color, especially when you're looking at service delivery or just highlighting issues. And it took a week for anybody to say anything in leadership here in the city, not just executive team, but also elected officials. And I wasn't shy about making it known that the silence was deafening, because, you know, regardless if our numbers are negligible, I think it still matters, as Elaine was saying, that to be seen, to feel like we are seen and heard really matters for our well-being and just our mental health. And so for me, that really affected me. And also, you know, just even all of the Atlanta also really affected me really badly because my mother was a single mother and immigrant and similar job situation, right? And so I felt very connected to what happened. And so for it not to be acknowledged, you know, locally, but then also just seeing the erasure in national television and the news was really hard for me. And I think that was a really hard month for me. I saw, you know, I asked for a lot of mental health days and stuff coming from that. And so that's how that affected me personally in my work. But I've always centered our experiences in the work that we do, and including our voices in the work that I do here at the city as well. So that's just the different ways that I feel, you know, it's affected me, and then where my local government has fallen short on the response.
Thank you, Genesis. Let me ask Neha also, please weigh in.
Well, first, let me say, Genesis and Elaine, thank you so much for sharing that. It's powerful to hear both of your words, and you both have already given all of us so much to think about. Ed, I think to answer the second part of your question, I've felt encouraged to see local governments leaning into Asian American Heritage Month and passing proclamations and hosting cultural events, and that's becoming more and more popular. I know that some local governments have even gone as far to release statements to condemn the racism and xenophobia that APIs are experiencing right now. I know City of Hillsboro, we released a statement. I do think one thing we can lean into a little bit more is providing more historical context on how we got here. I think that's the only way we can start confronting within ourselves how local government even plays a role in upholding bias. When we look at our history, we see that Asian Americans have been regularly scapegoated and faced routine discrimination and hate. The Chinese Exclusion Act, the Page Act are some examples that most people know that come to mind that specifically targeted Chinese Americans from immigrating to this country. And it's all a part of this pattern that we see today, right? And it's all of that history served as a precursor to the dehumanizing narratives that are harmful and you know, putting violence on Asian American bodies today. So I realize that's a tall order for local governments because not a lot of us are taught Asian American history. And when we were, it was very little unless we specifically sought it out. But I do think that local governments have a specific role to play in all of this, and keeping that historical context in mind is so important, because when we don't do that, it kind of promotes this understanding that all of this violence is happening in a vacuum, and that's absolutely not true.
Thank you all. Really extraordinary thoughts. Let's perhaps then turn to our work specifically, and in particular, let's think about how our agency's structures and functions have affected how we interact on issues of community interest, and in particular with community activism. Hyun, please give us a perspective on that.
Thank you very much. That was a powerful first question. Thank you for, I had not heard those perspectives in our meetings in I-NAPA, so thank you very much to Genesis, Elaine, Neha, I appreciate that. But just switching gears here, as far as agency structures, I wanted to talk about a theme, because I think all of our organizations, small to big, there's a myriad of structures in place right now to take on that, absolute priority to communicate as well as receive and solicit information from our affinity groups in all of our communities. For the city of Fife, I'll speak to, pre-pandemic, we've probably been doing a lot of things that many cities and towns have been doing, in the sense of, incremental communication styles. I think the pandemic, more so than anything, also on top of the true strife and hurt in our communities from many groups, including our Black residents or Asian residents. There's a lot of things that have come from the pandemic, but also come from specific instances of instability. For the city of Fife, we stood up our first communications team last year during the pandemic. And for perspective for folks that are listening to this, we're a small community, about 10,000. Our daytime population is quite large. We don't have the luxury of just doing things the way we do, because we are in the periphery of Tacoma, Seattle. We're a suburb of Tacoma in the port of Tacoma. A lot of commercial as well as big city issues affect us as well. At the turn of the year, we had our first mini Occupy movement here in the city of Fife, where a homeless advocacy group, activist group, took over one of our motels with the thought that it was the city of Tacoma's responsibility to relieve the suffering of many of our neighbors that are suffering. Unfortunately for this group, as well as unfortunately for many of the folks that were in the periphery that were throwing rocks, this motel happens to be in Fife and not in Tacoma. So a community of 10,000 and dealing with that situation. I'm incredibly proud of our team, our comms team, as well as our law enforcement professionals, and de-escalating the situation. But as far as, how do we continue to interact? This is a fluid situation for the city of Fife. We know that we're deficient. We know that we have to do better tomorrow. And I think these kind of conversations, these kind of ad hoc opportunities to, have facilitated conversations with our community, especially through teleconference, through Zoom, WebEx, Teams. I think that's been a blessing. That may be one of the silver linings of the pandemic, and how we're communicating and more openly and transparently, because our only currency, and I hope everyone agrees with this, our only currency as public administrators is transparency, right? Trust. And you have to build that trust, because there will be a day where you'll have to cash in on that trust. That's the biggest lesson that I've learned over the last few years, and that's how we're dealing with it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Hyun. I really appreciate that. Genesis, could you chime in on this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from my perspective, my role as resilience officer is very external facing for the organization. I work a lot with community organizations, trying to get a better understanding of how issues around, our various issues, not just social justice issues, are affecting our community residents. And of course, our community organizers are the best to reach out to tell us those frontline experiences. And so for me, I'm always engaged with our community organizers and, actively engaging them in the work that I am doing. So, one example is fine and fee reform that I'm working on here in the city of Dallas, inviting our community organizers to the table to participate in active policy recommendation development. And so for me, along the lines of what Hyun is saying, is building that trust. It's not just talking about, creating space at the table, but also being able to demonstrate that in the way that we deploy, we develop policies and recommendations here at the city. And so, they
Ed, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, and it looks like Genesis is frozen.
Yes. We'll give her a moment to come
Give
back.
her a moment. Yes, let's do that. And if necessary, we will move on. Oh, looks like we lost her. Okay, why don't we, Genesis, you're back, but you're muted.
Sorry about that. I got dropped real quick. But to close out, I think, my job requires me to engage with community organizers, right? And so for me, I actively seek their participation and input, and I think government should operate that way and not just shun them from active participation. So thank you, Ed. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, not at all. Clearly, our perspectives as individuals and the personal narratives that we bring really do have value in enabling us to bridge these really important challenges. Okay, now let's turn from the organizational perspective to the personal. Let's talk about what it's like to be considered a minority in the workplace. Let's ask our panel, could you describe how being considered a minority has affected your career and your approach to the work that you do? Let's start off with Ash.
Sure, Ed, that's a great question. I think that for me personally, it starts with a comparison of where I am from, what my privileges were back home in India, then coming to the US, first being in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, and then moving to Decatur, Georgia, seeing in each place how things have changed. Although my actual work experience only started with my fellowship, it was understanding, getting some sense of what is race, what is racism. It was race and racism 101 for me, asking questions, sometimes playing dumb, but just giving an opportunity for others to share their experience and for me to maybe become a little vulnerable in a few ways and also allowing them to become more vulnerable. I think it's not making assumptions based on what we are seeing in their lifestyle or their surroundings or anything like that. It's a lot of education and learning for me, knowing that in India, my privileges were related to my family background, they were related to my educational qualifications, and to a huge extent, the support that my family members provided to me that others might not have received. If I'm not wrong, my parents might actually be on the call right now. So that also shows a lot of privilege right there and a lot of support. So moving to another country and in the beginning, feeling like you do not really have family, but when your work family becomes like the family, it's no longer colleagues and co-workers, making sure that you are sharing your experience with them and in some ways educating them about what the other Asians and Asian Americans might be experiencing, sharing your opinion. I think that's a huge thing. Attending the city commission or council meetings and knowing what the community is going through right now. I think that you see a lot more of that being a minority because you constantly ask yourself, what impact can I make and what am I doing right now and what can I change? So I think there is a lot of self-introspection because of our status of being a minority. Am I doing the best of my capabilities and am I able to represent all the small social classifications that I might check the box on? Asian, yes. Indian, yes. Female, yes. All of these things. What am I doing at the end of the day? I think it's those questions that help me make some impact. Hopefully, I can say that, yes, in my community where I'm living right now, and maybe even to represent my family back home.
I'm sure they're very proud. Thank you, Ash. Yoshi, please weigh in on this question.
Sure, thank you, Ed. So both in Kansas, where I grew up, and now in Tennessee, the Asian population is very small, only about 3% of the population, which means that usually it wasn't uncommon for me to maybe be the only person of Asian or Pacific Islander heritage in a room. And I think that made me more self-conscious about myself and my work, both in that maybe I'm afraid, or it made me more afraid of failure, making a mistake, and wondering, will this affect everyone's perception of not just me, but is this going to reflect on all Asians, Pacific Islanders in their mind or in their eye? And I think another way it's affected me is maybe to give me a type of imposter syndrome. It's led me to second guess decisions that have been made. Was I given a particular assignment based on a stereotype, or was I selected or included in something just to be a token? And I think there are a lot of great TED Talks on imposter syndrome, and I think Michelle Obama's talked about it extensively too. But I think the main thing I try to keep in mind is that you can't get in your head trying to second guess why a decision was made, because you may never be able to truly know all the factors that went into a particular decision. I guess just to focus on what you can do, which is know that, just be aware that you did put in the work to be qualified and to be where you are, and to focus on what you can control, which is the work that you do, which I think will speak for you.
Great advice. Thank you. All right, then let's move on to a topic that we've talked about at one of our boba breaks, having a non-Anglo first name and how that affects your work and perceptions in the workplace. Genesis, could you weigh in on that?
Sure. And I think I have an Anglo name. First book of the Bible, right? If you're Christian, Phil Collins is banned. So I think to a certain extent, for me, it's what has thrown me off about my name is that it is common, but still people can't bring themselves to remember my name, right? Or they choose to shorten my name to different variations of G, Genesis, Jen, Genevieve. I've been called Genevieve so many times, I might just add it as my second name on my birth certificate. But it's not a hard name, right? And I think Yoshi's going to talk about his experience later, but it's not hard, yet people will create versions of my name that, that are easy for them. And just to be blunt, it's lazy. And my name is my name for a reason. And so now I refuse to let people shorten my name. You can't give me a nickname without my permission, and you will learn my name because it is easy to a certain extent, but I think it's really on us as, public administrators. It's important. Names mean so many things, right? And tell us so much about a person. And I think it's on us, even if you're Caucasian or white, I think you have a duty to learn people's names and learn how to pronounce it correctly. I think, but that goes for everybody, but I feel like I experience that more when I am in a room that is predominantly white, that my name is ignored. And, sometimes it's even infantilized, like Gigi. I'm like, no, it's just Genesis, right? So I think, if for our leaders that are here, you're leading organizations, I think make that a point. That can be across races as well and ethnicities, that learning people's names and making it a point to pronounce it correctly goes a really long way in buying, that buy-in from your team and also just your community in general.
Thanks, Genesis. Well, you led to Yoshi here. Please, Yoshi, weigh in on this.
Thank you, both Ed and Genesis, for that perspective too. I know that a lot of Asian American, Pacific Islander parents will give their child an Anglo name in a good faith effort to try to help their children assimilate into American culture. But so my parents they gave me a name, Tadayoshi. They thought it could be shortened to a more common westernized nickname. They thought maybe instead of Tadayoshi, I could go by Todd, which, I mean, aside from comments like, you don't really seem like a Todd, usually just ended up causing more confusion than anything, because the spelling's different. I can be a little soft-spoken, so instead of Todd, I'd usually get Tom or Ted or Tad or some other variation. I actually ended up getting two, when I turned 18, I got two draft cards, one for Todd and one for Tadayoshi. But I mean, finally, I just had to stop trying to fit in that way and just say, you know what, this is what my real name is, and I had to lean in and own it and be proud of my name. And I understand that if someone hasn't been exposed to Japanese names or other names that maybe are less common, that they can easily get tripped up. So, I mean, I'm happy to go by Yoshi as well, which actually is a shortened version of my full name. I mean, and again, like Genesis mentioned, if that's something that someone's comfortable with, but don't just assume that. I mean, I have a friend, not Asian, but his name is Michael. Don't you dare call him Mike. He will not. He does not like that. He does not respond to Mike. So yeah, names mean things, and if you want to shorten it, if someone named Muhammad, if you want to go by Mo, I mean, if that's something they're fine with or something they tell you, but again, that's not something you can just assume. But I'll also say that in the last couple of years, there have been probably a half dozen times where I've been in an email thread and someone begins referring to me using she, her pronouns. And being a cisgender binary person, it never really occurred to me before to list my pronouns, but seeing them listed regularly by other people in local government, I think that helped me to realize that in addition just to being more inclusive and welcoming to people, that listing my preferred pronouns, it's also a great way to cut down on awkward or embarrassing moments with people you work with.
Thank you, Yoshi and Genesis. Great perspectives. I wonder if any of our other panelists want to chime in on this question. We, in one of our prior discussions, it was commented in how having an unfamiliar name can result in any one of us or any person not being chosen for not being called on in class or not being invited to participate in something, mainly as much as anything else because of embarrassment by the person who's making the selection, not wanting to mess up themselves. So as we talk about the impact that the names have on ourselves, recognizing how our responses to unfamiliar names also affect those others is a really important dimension. Okay, so then with that, let's move forward and let's start thinking about or talking about what we'd like to share with others. How about advice you have for aspiring Asian Pacific administrators who may be still in school or just entering the profession? How about Ash? Could you respond to that question?
Absolutely. I think that there are so many opportunities that most communities have. Like in Decatur, we have Decatur 101. That's a great way for students to know more about how does local government work. And I think in the Asian community, we don't really see local government management as the most amazing career out there. I think we can get it there though. We can talk more about it. We can promote it more. Having engagement activities, programs like that, the Citizens Police Academy, having students participate in things like that. I think that's a great way to enter this world and know how many fantastic opportunities that we can have in this field. I mean, I think that ICMA's programs are great ways to enter the door again. I was able to participate in the Emerging Leaders Development Program, and I was able to connect with so many other early to mid-career level professionals that I could know more about the challenges they might be dealing with, and also in some ways just the common things that might be going on. I think one thing that we can talk about is, as current professionals, what can we do in terms of mentoring? Can we reach out to other high school students before graduation to see that this is what you can do? Maybe you can do a student internship at the engineering division so that you can learn more about engineering and local government management, or some other ways like that. I mean, it could be a community engagement intern. There are so many possibilities with the different departments that most local government agencies have. So I think it's about asking questions, networking, and that's it. I understand that for some, it might be harder to approach somebody you don't know and ask all these questions. So having opportunities like that in front of an entire classroom is easier, because when I see my friend go to a session, it makes me want to know more about what that is about. So I think those are a few of the tips I have.
Thanks, Ash. And then how about from the perspective of local government managers? How can local government managers create a more inclusive environment for emerging leaders such as yourself? Neha, could you chime in on this?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ed. So one of the first things that comes to mind for me is mentorship. It seems like the importance of mentorship is key in so many professions, but in city management, it seems like one of the critical elements, especially for professionals who are seeking to move from mid-career to senior level positions and eventually making that jump to the executive table for city management. And unfortunately, bias, as with so many other areas in life, comes into play here too. And it's been studied, and so much research shows that mentors typically seek out mentees that reflect themselves, or that they see themselves in and remind them of themselves. And so this concept of like attracts like really applies to mentorship, and especially when mentorship is so informal or starts from very informal spaces. So when the majority of managers in an organization are male or white, those folks might not necessarily seek out mentees that look different from them. And with many disparities, this impacts women and women of color the most. And so I think one way to remedy this is to set up a formal mentorship program. I know at the city of Hillsboro, we have one, and it's been very successful, and I've participated in it and gained so much value from it. But I think overall, the bigger point that I want to make also is that it's important to also just commit to talking about bias and how that shows up in our professional environments. And I think that cultivating a culture where the people in the organization who hold the most power or have the most influence have cultivated a culture where they can continuously talk about the bias that they might have, I think that could just lead to so many other fruitful things beyond mentorship that touch upon other areas of inclusion in the workplace.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Neha. Elaine, could you chime in on this question?
All right, thanks. Well said, Neha. So my tips: do your homework, read. I recommend The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias. It's by Dolly Chu. Make yourself a list based on that. It's very friendly for that. Make an effort to dialogue across difference. Be curious, ask questions, and listen. Be brave enough to try to take action, accept you might get it wrong, and to keep trying anyway, like I said before. Go out on a limb. Don't wait for the marginalized person to do it, like I often have to. If they do speak up first, seek to understand them. Try to resist the temptation of feeling defensive. We all do it. I get it. But don't demand either that they say it the right way. Sometimes that's really hard to do when it's in the moment, right? Encourage your peers to speak up too. Touching back on what Neha was saying about culture, some ideas about how to do that is have the topic of inclusion as a recurring agenda item for your department head meetings, where you can brainstorm, as a team, how you can do things better. Nobody's got the formula, nobody's got the silver bullets, but we can all get there together.
Wow, okay, pretty powerful thoughts. Let's look forward. So here we are coming out of the pandemic, and looking forward to whatever this next normal will be. Could you share some of your hopes for 2021 and beyond? Let's jump to Hyun.
Thanks, Ed. I think professionally, my I guess hope and dream for this year is that I could be more, looking over the horizon, what work is going to represent for my team that I serve here. And what I mean by that is, the pandemic has brought silver linings as far as how work is being done, the way we're communicating, this facilitated conversation today. There's a lot of great things, and the nature of work is changing. The interesting thing, I I used to criticize what I did and what we do in the public sector from the standpoint of we're too slow, we're too archaic, we're too incremental. Let's just zero this out and do these things. Well, it's just happened. It just so happens we're not lagging behind the private sector. We are all in this together as a country. So that's my professional goals. Personally, I'm looking for more opportunities to spend time with my family. I would say, this is my 4th year in my community now. And, for the sage advice I've received from many folks that have come before me and my mentors has always been, hey, burn it on both ends to prove yourself to your community. But I'm looking forward to scaling it back a little bit to get that work-life balance personally, spending more time with my kids and just checking in, even though I tell myself each morning that everything's great. Mental health is very important, folks. So I would encourage everyone to just do some retro, introspective thinking as far as where you are in your place and embracing the silence. With that, thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks, Jan. Let's go to Neha. Would you like to chime in on 2021 and beyond?
Sure. So personally, I would love to go on a vacation in 2021. Maybe 2022, who knows? But all jokes aside, I think from a local government perspective, I'm hopeful that as folks that work in local government, that we are learning and absorbing so much in the ways that we've had to be nimble during this time period. I think one of the things I've learned is just how important it is to engage the community more thoughtfully. And I think that's a practice that at the city of Hillsboro, we're leaning into a little bit more. And there are just so many ways in which these trends, since we've been on the front lines of responding to the pandemic and responding to so many other things, we've taken on roles that we haven't traditionally been in and aren't necessarily comfortable in or have the immediate capacity to appropriately respond to. But I'm like, even in my organization, I'm seeing people step into roles that are absolutely new and out of their comfort zone and seeking the resources and realizing this is going to be a part of our future. So I'm hopeful that this is a time for local government professionals to kind of rethink what the role of local government is and how we can be really impactful and responsive to the needs of the people that we serve.
Thank you. Tremendously inspiring. All right, Genesis, would you like to chime in on this as well, or was that a applause?
It was an applause for Neha.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, then we're almost out of time, but I do want to give the panel an opportunity to share with our audience. The last question. What advice do you have for local government managers hoping to attract and retain talent like yourselves or your colleagues on the panel? Or would you like to share any advice for town councils or city councils? Let's lead off with Ash and then see if others have thoughts.
I think all the questions were awesome. I love this question too. I will say hire a local government management fellow. Go get us all. I mean, I think that this is such a wonderful fellowship program. I've enjoyed being a part of it. And I know having 3 out of 6 panelists being former fellows, I think that is amazing. Investing in education and training, I think that's such an important thing. Attending the ICMA conference or all of these other opportunities that we have had, it not only allows us the opportunity to engage with each other, but also learn about the challenges that another community might be dealing with that we might have experienced in the past or might have to go through in the future. So I think that's very important. And I think, Ed, you mentioned Coach Connect. I think every manager can be a part of the ICMA Coach Connect program. So you can find your new mentee without having the need to go and find a mentee that is like you or anything like that. It could be anybody, and you could be an amazing coach.
Terrific. Thank you, Ash. All right, Elaine, last word.
Yeah, so gosh, I mean, listen to Ash. How could you not want to hire people like her? So I would suggest that you join the ICMA affiliate organizations that allow you to. I-NAPA allows non-Asian members. If we see you listening and learning, that would help a lot. And encourage your department heads to be members too.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Well, it looks like we are out of time. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up. let me just say thank you to ICMA, especially our supporters and champions that got us to this point, Agnes Jisun Moon, Felissa Logan right there, and Tammy Simmons Parker. I really, really appreciate all your support and assistance in getting us here. And thank you to our panelists. Your stories and your perspectives are extraordinary. Give me and us great hope for the future.
And I want to thank you and our panelists as well on behalf of ICMA, and to everybody who came in today. Thank you for your participation. This recording will be available next week, so watch for it. You'll have availability to share it with others and to view it again yourselves. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all once again. Take care. Have a great weekend. Have a wonderful Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month.